Welcome to DevJams. This is where we talk with guests that are doing interesting, inspiring, innovative things when it comes to image and video management and delivery inside of their projects. My name is Sam Brace, and I am the Senior Director of Customer Education and Community at Cloudinary. And in this episode, we are bringing back a guest who happens to be also a Cloudinary employee. That is our own Colby Fayock. And it's amazing the amount of work that he's been doing over the years, helping developers to better understand how to work with images and videos, essentially rich media assets inside of their applications, their software, their programs that they're working on. And today is no exception, as he has developed his own amazing application called Photobox that we are going to be profiling here today, showing how he was able to develop this with Cloudinary technology, Next.js, and a few other bells and whistles along the way. Joining me for every one of our episodes is our co-host, Jen Brissman. Jen Brissman is a technical curriculum engineer with myself at Cloudinary, and we are always so happy to have her here, providing her expertise and developer knowledge to our audience members like yourself. So, Jen, welcome to the program.
Hi, happy to be here.
So, Jen, tell me, why are you excited to talk to Colby?
I'm excited to talk to Colby because he's created this awesome app. It's kind of like a Google Photos clone that we're going to hear a lot more about, but we do see a lot of versions of photo albums that use Cloudinary, and we featured a few on DevJams, but with each example we see, there's something slightly different and interesting to discuss, and we'll find that a lot in Colby's project. So I'm excited to talk to Colby today.
I am too. And I agree with what you're saying, that obviously, if we are focusing on image management, image delivery, being able to show everything in a photo album style is something that people naturally are inclined to do, especially when they're working on it from a project basis. But some of the things that are also in here, I'm pretty excited about in terms of the way that he's showing off animated content. And frankly, I think the UI is just superb. So I'm super, super excited for everything that Colby is going to be able to show us here today. Plus, it's just a pleasure to talk to somebody as educated and exciting as Colby is himself. With that said, let's talk about some of the things that are important to know before you get into this DevJams episode. And that's first, if this is your first time with us, welcome. If this is your 16th time with us, welcome again. It's important to note that all episodes, whether those are new episodes or previous episodes, they are all available wherever you enjoy podcasts. That would probably include Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, but also our own Cloudinary Academy, which is at training.cloudinary.com. You can actively involve yourself with thousands of hours teaching you how to use Cloudinary technology and also being more familiarized with many of the SDKs that we actively use, such as those for Node.js, Python, PHP, React, and others. Also, even including our Android SDK for our mobile developer audience. It is also important to note that we have an active community inside of Cloudinary of users like yourself. 2 million plus registered developer users are using Cloudinary, and many of them are involved with our Cloudinary community. You can actively ask questions, share knowledge of each other, as well as being able just to show off the great work that you're doing with images and videos. You can absolutely do that at community.cloudinary.com. And then one thing to also note before we dive deep into our conversation with Colby is that everything that we're going to be talking about today around Colby's project can actively be accessed at photobox.dev. So feel free to check out that URL and follow along with any of the parts that we have for this overall episode. And then also note that everything for the Photobox project is inside of the Cloudinary community space inside of GitHub, with many repositories associated. And some of them we've actually profiled also on our DevJams programs itself. So feel free to check that out at github.com/community-community. I think I said that right. Cloudinary/community. There we go. So with that said, let's bring on our friend Colby. So Colby, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Absolutely. So Colby, obviously I know a lot about you. Jen knows a lot about you. We get the chance and pleasure to work with you every single day here at Cloudinary. But for those that are not familiar with yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Developer Experience Engineering at Cloudinary. So it's under the DevRel tree, if you're familiar with that kind of part of the organization, where it's really working with the developer community. My task is to really focus on the code-oriented stuff. So I maintain some SDKs like a Next.js one. I create code examples, content. I create demo applications like the one we're going to talk about today, to not only be able to use and play with it, but you can actually spin it up yourself. It's completely open source, and you can kind of get an idea of how those kind of things work under the hood using not only Cloudinary, but some of the technology that we use to integrate with it.
And I think what's fascinating is that, Colby, like, since you've started at the company and now, of course, today, like, you're definitely one of the faces that is probably one of the first ones that people get to hear from, be able to be associated with when it comes to Cloudinary. So the work that you're doing by putting out the code sample, the SDK work that you've been doing, actively involved with the community efforts, there's so many things that people get to experience that you're touching, whether they realize it or not. You're definitely a part of what is normally the first experiences they have when they're working with our service. So it's impactful, all the work that you're doing. And it's interesting because, like, if you think back to the last time we had you on, it's where you were talking about the Netlify build plugin and being able to make it easy for people to incorporate Cloudinary and image delivery into Netlify builds. And look at all the other things that you've gone ahead and developed at this point. There's a long list of things that you've actively done. So it's great what you've been up to.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I typically find that people really enjoy the tools they use. And, one of the things that we want to try to do is try to be there for them, right? So Next.js is one of my favorite tools to work with. I created an SDK around that because not only do I love to use it, I think a lot of developers love to use it. And the easier we can make it for people to not only use Cloudinary, but build awesome things is, part of what I love and really want to see.
I love it. And I think it's wonderful and interesting, nice little segue, because the project that you are going to be talking about here today, the PhotoBox project, it's actively built on Next.js. And obviously you just said you enjoy using it. A lot of developers enjoy using it, but what was some of the more reasonings behind the efforts around showing Cloudinary with Next.js, or like, what was your real reasoning behind the love of using Next.js in development projects?
Yeah, so historically, it's been the focus on developer experience. Frameworks come and go. There was frameworks before Next.js, but one thing that the team has always put a lot of attention on is that developer experience, and it just makes it a joy to use. It makes it easy to build awesome things without having to worry about a lot of the complexities that really we shouldn't have to think about when we can focus on the more interesting parts of our application, or the more unique parts of our application. So it's been a joy to use over the years, seeing it progress and evolve.
Absolutely. So I think when we're talking about the PhotoBox project itself, what was the reasoning for developing it in its inception? Like, obviously, as Jen and I pointed out, there have been many photo album, photo gallery types of projects that we've seen. Developers, when they're first learning Cloudinary, maybe they're trying to apply these into their own applications. Maybe they add them as a nice component to a website. We've seen this done in many different forms and iterations. What was the reasoning that you decided to go down this path? And like, what was the angle that you're saying, maybe why it might be different than some of the other efforts that have been taking place?
For sure. So the original reason that I created it was for a video course that we did in partnership with Free Code Camp, where I wanted to teach something, and I thought a Google Photos clone would be an awesome thing to teach. So the inception of the project really came from there. But yeah, knowing me, I kind of blew the scope and I added way too many features. So I didn't end up teaching the full scope of what the project is today. But ultimately, I still wanted to kind of continue it on and leave it in a place where people can really easily, and we'll see later how easy, really easy spin up their own version of it so that they can, enjoy and use it. And I think some of the biggest differentiators that Google Photos brings, and hopefully this as well, is not just being able to have your images in there and view them, but really bring the photos to life with creations, which is one of my favorite part, where you can do things like creating collages or color pop and little animations. And there's also an interactive editor, which uses a ton of the Cloudinary transformations in order to do things like cropping or remove a background or just some simple filters. So that's kind of what I see as a differentiator, is being able to kind of have fun with it and, create new versions of the photos that you want to enjoy.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I've alluded to this already, but the user interface on this is super clean, super easy to use. It looks like something that you would see from the professionality of something like a Google itself that is coming through it. So it's definitely something where I know that looking at the various photo album projects, sometimes it's strictly to show like I can upload the file or I can crop the file and make sure I'm putting it into a grid. but being able to make sure that it has that touch that you can see when a certain level of UI has been expertly thought about. It's, I think, something that hopefully other designers use as inspiration, because I think UI is such a valuable part of a interface that people can use and want to readily use. So I think there's something to what you've done here too that hopefully
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I totally agree. UI, taking that to another level just makes it more of a joy to use, and especially from a UX perspective, trying to get some of the frustrations and friction out of the way to just make it as easy as possible to do things.
Absolutely. Jen, what are you thinking? Is there any questions that you have before we pop open Colby's screen and show off all the great work that PhotoBox is?
The questions that I would have, I think, spoil some of what's coming. So I think the best thing would just be to look at the functionality and kind of see what it is that Colby built.
Yeah, well, without further ado, let's make it happen. So, Colby, what do you got on here on the screen?
All right, so here we have the photobox.dev website, and really this is just a landing page that kind of gives an idea about what you're going to see inside. Has some nice logos on here to show you what the technology is that's actually powering this thing. But ultimately, what we're going to focus on is just spinning up a new instance of this, where we can kind of get an idea of, first of all, how easy it is to spin up a new instance, but also then we can play around and see what's actually inside PhotoBox. So we can start off by using the copy button here to create this, but I'm just going to go to the get started, which has a little bit more in-depth instructions, where the first thing we can do, copy that same link, which it's going to use a tool called Create Next App. And what that's going to allow us to do is basically take a GitHub repository, and this script is going to clone it down, install the dependencies, and refresh Git history. So basically just creating a new project from scratch based off a GitHub repository. So I'm going to paste that in, and I'm going to add DevJams on there so that I can create a new directory, because I already have PhotoBox in my local environment. And as we can see, it's cloning it down. I can now navigate to that directory. And before we start to actually spin this up, we have one other thing we need to do, and that's configure some Cloudinary environment variables. Now, before we hopped on here, I created a new account. So this is just a fresh new account from Cloudinary, completely free. You can register and spin this up with a free with the free tier. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these environment variables and then open up my code editor. I'm going to create a new file .env.local and paste those in, where now I'm just going to bring over my Cloudinary credentials, which if you're watching this, I'm going to, of course, delete this and rotate the keys afterwards. But I'm going to copy in the API key and the secrets. And now all that's left to do, npm run dev to spin up the new environment, opening it up in a new tab. And we have a new instance of PhotoBox. And now, of course, it doesn't come with any photos. You need to start to add your photos. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me just make sure it's loaded. And I'm going to browse my directory. I just have a bunch of AI generated photo albums that I've had created over the years. So I'm going to go ahead and add those. As we can see, it's uploading, and as they finish, they're going to get added to our media library. And looks like I had a duplicate there. But ultimately, now we have a new instance of PhotoBox with some images in it. So let's kind of explore what's going on here. So if we look over at our Cloudinary account, we can see that a new folder was created, PhotoBox, where if we go inside, we can see all those images there. So every time you upload a new image into PhotoBox, your image is going to pop up here. Now, also, in addition to that, we do add some tags to the images just to do some little organization behind the UI, which we can talk about as we're working into this. But it's the way that we're going to ultimately store them. It's stored in a folder. So if you like to keep your organization in place, it's not going to mess up anything. And it's just going to create its own thing. But now that we have this, we can actually start to play around with some of the features of it. So again, one of my favorite parts of it is the creations part of PhotoBox. So I'm going to go ahead and select this one. And let's try animation to start. And what's happening in the background is Cloudinary is processing the image. And once it's initially created, it'll then be served super fast from the CDN after that. But we can see it kind of gives like a Ken Burns effect. And it's an effect that you kind of see in the Google Photos, where it's going to look for the most interesting part of the image and zoom into that, as opposed to directly in the center. Now, I can go ahead and save this to library, or if I don't want this particular one, I could just simply hit X. But another thing that I can do is if I select multiple images, how about these three, I can create a collage. And collages are also a lot of fun, especially if you have a couple photos that you want to create of your family or something like that. It just makes it a really nice, easy way to add all your photos to one single image. But let's get to color pop, because I think that's one of the cooler ones, where in order to take advantage of some of the features like color pop and background removal, you also need to enable the Cloudinary AI background removal add-on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head to settings and go to add-ons, search for background removal. It's the first one. I'm just going to enable the free tier. It comes with a nice free tier. That way we can play around with it. But now let me refresh, and I should be able to just do it. And what's going to happen in the background is when you first request the image from Cloudinary, it's going to return a 423 of processing. You see the result already. But we're handling the polling for that so that when it's complete, it's going to stitch together the images where the background is a desaturated image. And then we have a foreground image where it's with the background removed so that we can kind of create that color pop effect, if you will. I like this one. I'm going to save this to my library.
I like this one too. I like this one a lot.
Yeah. So we can see that it was added here. Another cool thing about when you work with creations is maybe you want to see all the creations that you created. So we have a little bit of an organization in addition to, just simply creating it, where what we're doing under the hood for this is we're adding a tag. So if we go back to our media library, we can see inside of Photobox, I just added that new version as well as the transparent version you see in the background. But we can see that this now has the Photobox creation tag. So that way I can organize my media as much as I'd like. I can do different things with this. That's also how we do favorites. If you want to favorite your images, we also use that for creating a trash mechanism. So say you want to delete some images, it's basically putting that tag on there so that later you can delete them once you know you want to kind of empty the trash. So that's a kind of high level look at the creations, which is one of my favorite things. But in addition to that, we can go into the actual editor and stop me if you have any questions.
I've got tons, but I'm not stopping you yet. You're on a go. You're on a roll. I love
Sounds good. Sounds good. So if you're familiar with Google Photos, I tried to kind of create a similar kind of UI where I'll show the editing, but you can kind of get some short metadata about it. I mentioned you can star and favorite and add it to trash. But the editor is the interesting part of it, where you can have some AI related features like improving the image. Maybe you want to remove that background, which we did before. But then you can also do things like cropping. So I have just a few standard formats that you would typically see. It's going to also crop it to the point of the image that makes the most sense using AI. So it's going to find the most interesting part of the image and crop it to that. But ultimately, it's just an easy way to hop in there and grab some of these common formats. Maybe you want to use this one as a background for your phone or something. But then there's also a couple other cool filters that you can add. Really, when you spin up your own instance, because you're using Cloudinary, you can really use any transformations and add as many filters and effects as you want. I like how the sepia one kind of turned out for this. It looks pretty epic in my opinion. Cool. Yeah. But ultimately, once you're done, I'm zoomed in on this. So that's why the UI was hidden. But you can either save that or you can save a copy of it similar to Google Photos. But ultimately, that's a cool way to be able to edit your images and have a nice little interactive experience while doing it, taking advantage of Cloudinary transformations.
I'm super impressed. And I think I've got a lot of questions about some of the creation opportunities
Sure.
I'm into. The first one I would love to package a little bit. Like you talked about the one where you created a Ken Burns effect and you had the ability to animate alongside of that. How is that taking place? Like if I was a Cloudinary user, how would I get a similar type of effect just with maybe the URL or maybe just transformations in general?
Yeah, so we can dive into the code in a few minutes here, but for now, I can just kind of show you how it's actually working by simply using the URL, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So let me select the animation here. And now it's showing the epic sepia one. But we can see that inside of the URL, we have the transformation. It's a little small probably because the browser UI is not big. But we have the effect of zoom pan. And then I have the settings for that. So it's zooming in at a 1.4, not percentage, but I guess that would be 140%. And then it's ultimately looping it to, keep it going on and on. But we're using G-Auto here for the targeting, where alternatively, if you want to use specific targeting, maybe you found specific coordinates in an image, you can also provide the coordinates, which is pretty cool. But ultimately, these transformations is how we achieve it, which makes it really easy to be able to create these different kinds of creations and effects because everything is just a little URL parameter applying it to, the image.
I got to tell you, what you've done here is showing zoom pan with Giotto. This is something that I have not even seen that much. And
Oh,
I run education at Cloudinary. So this is a cool little feature to be able to emphasize the piece, because a lot of what I've seen it done is what you alluded to, the way of like targeting specific parts, like a bigger image. And you're like, okay, I want to show the shirt and then the shoes and then like kind of point to different things. But I like this because this is something where like, I could see with hover states, I could see it with rollovers and things like that. There's lots of functionality tied to this, was zooming in on the most interesting aspect feature that you're doing with this. So I think there's lots of cool aspects here alone.
totally. And the thing that I find really compelling about the automated the G Auto, using AI to determine the subject is this makes it really compelling at scale, right? Where you might not have the coordinates for thousands of images, but you still want to do some kind of similar effect. So by letting the AI handle that for you, you really don't have to think about that too much.
Yeah, this is cool. I like when I saw that, I was like, there's some magic here that like I have not seen fully before. So this is very, very slick what you're doing here.
Thanks.
And then if I understand the color pop correctly, this is kind of like where you're almost kind of playing with the idea of like layers, if we think of it from like a Photoshop perspective, where you've separated the background from the foreground and then you're applying maybe filters to the background or maybe filters to the foreground to really emphasize it. If I understand that, like I'm trying to think of it conceptually.
Ultimately, I'm removing the background from an image. And when I was talking about it before, it returns a 423 the first time you hit that area. Basically, that's processing. So when I see that it's processing, I pull for the image a couple times until it's complete. And then ultimately, I then use that image to construct this layered image where we have the foreground image, which is the color part, which is just the image with the background removed. But then the background image is the original image, only it's desaturated. And you can see that here, simply using the grayscale effect was able to desaturate it for me.
I like it. And you can see exactly what you're doing here because with the L underscore, it's where we're doing that layering effect with overlays and being able to apply it all. So very slick, very slick.
Yeah.
And this is something where like I've noticed this even from like an e-commerce perspective, where there's a lot of customers that are saying, I want to show the model that's wearing the clothes, but I want to make sure that, the background's not distracting from that because maybe it was taken in a really colorful tropical area. Then doing this color pop technique is something that even if you're not building a Photobox application, you can derive something from this too. So,
yeah, for sure.
In the way the layers work, is it that the top layer is just placed on the original photo layer and there's really two people there, but the one behind is just covered? Since you remove the background, that front layer is color popped and that's what's placed on front, right?
Yeah. Am I able to? I'm blanking on what I would need to do, but let me see. Can I just add the X?
If you made it like a PNG or something, or
Yeah. So what I'm trying to show here is you can then mess with the positioning, right? So what I did here is I added X_100, which is basically saying I want to move it 100 to the right. So you can see exactly here now what I'm doing, where we have that front layer and it was able to move over. But because I positioned it exactly where it would be relative to the original image, it's able to provide that effect.
Just be right on top. Awesome. I love that you showed that with the X100, scooted it over, really did this like peek behind the curtain, literally.
Yeah.
Happening.
And it's an even more dramatic album cover if I think about it. Like now it's like the coming of the guide. It's like oh no, this is wonderful. I love this so much.
Awesome.
So much. Okay, so the last creation that you did show was the collage one, where you were able to take picture 1, 2, 3, bring them together. Obviously, this is a huge one. I mean, I remember Instagram had a whole app for it called Layouts, which was just this concept that you were able to use seamlessly. How are you making this one work behind the hood?
So it's somewhat similar to the color pop, to be honest. So what I'm doing is I'm taking all three of the images, I'm creating one base image as the base layer, and really I'm not even doing anything with that base image. It's just a mechanism to support having a new Cloudinary image. Because honestly, what I do is I use the colorize feature and make it all white. That way, just in case like there's a pixel showing through or something, it's not going to show some kind of random color next to an image. But ultimately, that's not going to happen anyways. But ultimately, what's going on is each of these are an overlay on top of that original image. So I basically create the positioning, I create the size of the kind of container that I want, and then I use a crop with fill so that I can take that image layer and fill it to that container that I created. to be able to create that layout. So that also allows me to do, layouts of different numbers of images, whether it's 3 or 4. I don't think I support 5 right now. Maybe I should add that.
Oh, Colby, why not?
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's up to 4. But I can easily add. I'll show you the code in a little bit here, but I can easily add any number of collage layers you want, as long as you create those kind of container spots, the template ultimately for the overlays.
This is fantastic. I mean, what I love about what you've shown here, and we're all about education here. We're all about teaching users how to work with images and videos, but you've done it in a way to say, like, this is something that you would commonly need to do, as we talked about. It's a common project that we see a lot of developers use when they're wrapping their heads around Cloudinary, is building up a photo gallery like you've done. But what you've now done is you've incorporated some things that also are the magical parts of our service, in my opinion, like the fact that you can do overlays, the fact that you can do background removal quickly, the fact that you can also be able to the zoom pan thing. Once again, that's huge. And also the fact that you've also tied in tagging and metadata associated with this to say, this is giving you different corresponding views and providing it in that admin API style that is just, it's huge. This is definitely, if someone's trying to be like, what can Cloudinary do today? There's a lot of the things that we want to emphasize in this. So hopefully this is gaining the traction that it deserves.
Yeah, and I think the tagging is an interesting thing, because what I wanted to try to avoid with this project is to avoid just layering a ton of different services on it. And I could have easily added a database to manage all these different aspects of it. That's probably the common approach. But I wanted to kind of think creatively about it, and how can we make this even easier for somebody just the Cloudinary account. So tags were a perfect use case for that, where even with the trash can, I can just simply add a tag. I can hide it and filter it from all the views, to prevent it from showing as if it had been added to the trash. And then, if somebody wants to then remove those items from the trash, I don't currently have a mechanism actively removing the images, but like a planned way to do that is to use a GitHub action, for instance, where every 30 days it checks the trash can and the 30-day-old images. I think that's how Google Photos does it, 30 days. All the 30 days trashed images, you can just delete them by searching using that tag. So it makes for a really nice and easy way to kind of create that database-like experience by just taking advantage of tags.
I love it. Jen, is there anything else that we haven't unpackaged with the front end of this?
I don't think so. I'm looking forward to seeing how some of this works.
Yeah. And I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention is, how easy it was to get the images in here, because the Cloudinary upload widget was, it instantly gave me that drag and drop experience. But we'll see how even easier it is to drop that into the project.
Yes.
As far as the code goes, so we already saw the top of this. Let me zoom in a little bit more. I'll just poke around and show some of the interesting parts, where a lot of this is just kind of configuration and setting up the project. But ultimately, we have some of our starting points where, how about let's go into that homepage. The way that Next.js works with the app router is you have server components and you have client components. Now, to try to optimize for both use cases, I still wanted to provide an interactive experience in the client without being able to not take advantage of some of the optimizations of server components. So, and for server components, what I'm allowed to do is actually make requests in that component as it's rendering through that initial request, where then once it gets to the client, it hydrates the React application, and then I can then continue on the journey for somebody, such as making those requests for the creations and whatnot. But we can see here at the top of the homepage, I'm first grabbing those images based off of that tag that we talked about, which is going to be just that generic basic tag, which is going to say that these are all the images that are inside of my library. Now, once I have that, I pass it off into this media gallery component, which is really the juice of the entire page, where this is going to be, and I'm not going to walk through every single function on here, but kind of just scrolling through it. It's going to be where I'm handling all those different interactions, handling all the different requests. This is going to be the pop-up dialog modal that we see that allows you to actually interact with all the different creations. But as we scroll down and get through all this, we eventually land on where I'm looping through all those images, and I'm creating all the different interactions for the images themselves, as well as just adding the image itself, which we can find here. which adds the image to the gallery on the page. Once we kind of see how this is, how we're actually getting the images on the page, probably the next logical thing to talk about is how we can think about all these different interactions.
Yeah.
Now we can see things here like we have an upload button, which the way that we were able to make this easily work is using the Next.js SDK that I put together for Cloudinary. We have a lot of drop-in components for that. So if we kind of follow this one through, this is actually wrapping the Cloudinary upload button, which we can see is imported here. Where what I'm doing is whenever an image is uploaded using the upload widget, it ultimately fires a callback function, which I'm then able to then continue on into the state of the photo box application, which at that point I use TanStack Query in order to manage that state and be able to basically organize the requests and make sure everything's keeping in sync for actually displaying all the images on the page, all the different mutations, and all that stuff. But as I'm passing in that data from the server to the client, I'm ultimately passing that into TanStack Query, which then hydrates and takes over from there.
So, quick question: I'm seeing something. So, scroll down a little bit on your code here. So, as we know, this photo box application photos are images, images are photos, and you can see that declared here of a resource type with image. So, my brain's a little tickled here. If I were to say change that resource type to video, is there a way that I could turn this project into video box, or is that like basically like am I going too far with that?
This could totally support videos. The tricky thing is being able to build the UI around it, because it's not exactly just drop in. So say for instance, if I change this to video, some of the things that I would need to change is, for instance, on the media gallery, I would need to detect the resource type, and maybe I would render a CLD video player instance instead, which is totally doable. And the nice thing about the transformations is many of the transformations that apply to images also apply to video. So a lot of those things would just work, but it's just a matter of making sure that we have a good video experience when somebody's using this. And I just haven't had the time to kind of make sure that I could think that completely through.
Oh yeah, and I'm not asking you to do it either.
Totally, yeah.
But it's more like when I saw that, I was like, oh, you're declaring the resource type there, because a lot of times when we use resource types, so you can use image or video, or you can use auto to detect what it would be. And I was like, oh, wait, because it's image, what if you went the other way? So anyway, that's just me thinking. But maybe we're inspiring somebody. We're like, oh, maybe we want to take Colby's project and turn it into video box. Anyway,
absolutely.
Lots of ideas.
Absolutely, totally. One of the things that's amazing about Cloudinary is the flexibility between the images and videos, and being able to share a lot of those same transformations to be able to dynamically crop and resize both images and videos, and not have to think about two completely different resource types and still get a similar effect. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about it. Now, as far as the creations go, I guess I can kind of pop into there next. Let me see if I can find where that would be. What I can just do is look at the functions. I'm using shadcn UI in order to render a lot of the different components. So this component, for instance, is the drop-down menu, where in the instance of any of these different creations that I want to click, maybe we can start off with collage is a simpler one. So let's start off with that one. What I'm doing is I have this somewhat inner library of functions that create the different transformations to ultimately generate that creation URL. So if we follow this along through to animation, we can see what I'm doing is I'm constructing a Cloudinary URL where I'm passing in a template, which for the animation templates, there's currently just one. My idea was that you could create different versions of animations. One of the things about Zoom Pan is in itself, there's a lot of different features, but some of the other animation ideas that I was having is, I know you can create GIFs out of using a bunch of different frames, or so maybe you can select 4 images and you can create a GIF of those 4 images as one of your creations. But that would use our GIF creation API. I forget what the actual official name for it is, but that's a future feature that would be awesome to add to the creations library.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be. Absolutely. It would be like, and I think that's to your point. Like, the nice thing about what you've done is you've created this template that people can work off of, no pun intended with this part, but it is to say, like, people can add additional animation templates as they expand the usage of an application like PhotoBox. So this is slick. And I like also that you're now showing us all of the details about how you're applying the Zoom Pan with eLoop, in here, the options where you're applying the G-Auto, zooming to the 140% of the image. So this is also slick to be able to see how the template was working and how it transforms into the transformations that you have in the URL.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on the topic of the templates, we can also look at the collage template where similarly, I have the collage, and this is going to be the basis of it, where ultimately I'm just creating that bottom template of a blank white image. And again, I'm using that first image, and really I'm just using it as a way to create a Cloudinary asset, a blank canvas, if you will, where I use that colorize feature in order to do that. But once I have that, I'm able to use these different templates, and we can see I have 1, 2, and that's going to be based off of the number of assets you pass into the function. So it's going to be like, this is going to be 1 image, which basically just returns the same image. Then you have 2 images and so on. But we can see here, I'm using the overlays property in order to layer those on. So we have the first image, we have the second image, and in this instance where it's just half and half, literally the only difference is specifying a different gravity. So maybe I could abstract this a little bit better if I wanted to create different template pieces that are reusable, for instance. But I didn't over-engineer that at this point. But we can see the difference is just simply the gravity. One's on the left and one's on the right. Where now if we get into the territory of having 3 images, we now have one left tall image, which is going to be that height of 1200. But then we have the 2 other images, which are going to be in the top right corner and the bottom right corner. So that's how we're able to use gravity to kind of anchor it into the layout position that we actually want.
It's a cool use of the compass-based gravity, to be honest, too, because that's one thing that a lot of times when people use gravity with Cloudinary, they always use G-Auto, right? Because it's focused on an interesting aspect. You've demonstrated that with the zoom pan. But sometimes you see when we train on how to use the compass-style directions, normally we end up moving into the concept of overlays. But the fact that you're using it from an overlay perspective to put like the collage aspect compared to maybe like a watermark of a logo or something along those lines. So this is a good application of that transformation.
Yeah, and I thought it was clever how you used that base image and made it all white as opposed to just using, the image at the 0th item in the index of images as itself, because no one would see it anyway. You're actually just making sure in case a pixel popped through. That's so clever. I love that.
A little wish list feature of mine in the future is maybe we can have a base Cloudinary asset without actually specifying an asset, because being able to dynamically generate the images like this, you don't always need that base image. So being able to just have that base canvas and then use overlays and even underlays to kind of dynamically create your Photoshop-like experience of those layers, I think is pretty useful. But ultimately, practically just using any of those images that you're using as part of the overlays as that base image, and then just making it a blank canvas perfectly works well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the similar type of concept could work for borders as well. If the base image was a certain color and everything was just slightly smaller to fit within it, I guess there are multiple ways you could do borders, but it kind of feels like sky's the limit and it's all possible with Cloudinary. So
that just made me think it'd be a cool effect to have. So if you have like a base, imagine like space, your base underlayer is a galaxy, and then have an overlay of just a white block. You're now creating a frame of a galaxy. That'd be cool.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
And then whatever inside of that. I was thinking a similar thing with like, I know in your CloudyCam app that you've built, there are different backgrounds that you can use. And so I was just thinking about different backgrounds for this collage to go on top of. I mean, truly.
Exactly. And I mean, honestly, a lot of those features can get pulled in. And let me see if I can just pull that up really quick. cloudycam.fi.app to kind of show the audience what we're talking about. So this application, sorry if this is divulging.
No, I love it. I love it.
So I created this application for basically events, where at the events, I pull this application onto an iPad, and I guess I was looking at the wrong camera. So I pulled this up on an iPad so people can interact with this with a ring light, so that they can take a selfie, and they have all these different, overlays that they can add to start. So these are different effects. If I want to add my unicorn horn to my head, or, the deal with it glasses, but also I can add some different styles. So I want to recolor it, or I can add some backgrounds to it. So this is going to use the similar effect to the color pop, where I remove the background, and instead of adding the desaturated version, I can add whatever other background I want, such as if I want to be in the office. It kind of shows that these are all just Cloudinary transformations, and I'm able to stack them in that, that layering effect. But also they're all just URL parameters, because I can just open this up and we can see that this is all just coming from the URL and stacking all those transformations together to create this, this effect.
So awesome. Cool. Love it. Yeah, let's take a look though at the color pop now that we've talked about the other ones.
Yeah, that was a big tangent there.
No, it was
Yeah.
great.
So the color pop one is a little bit more complicated, and the reason for this is not only do we need to perform some of those on the fly creations, we also need to use that the image with the background removed. So this includes a little extra processing to it. As we can see, there's an await here because we need to wait for that request to finish. So navigating through to color pop, we can see what I'm doing is creating that background removed URL, which is just simply going to have background removal as the parameter in there. So all I want is the same image with the background removed. I then wait for that to load and finish loading. And then once I have that, I actually construct the image with all those layers in place. So I have the background removed resource, and then we can see where I actually construct that, where I have my base image, I crop it and everything, but then I have the overlay, which is that image with the background removed, and then I crop it and center it to be the exact same as what it is on top of that original image.
Smart.
And the grayscale we can see here too.
Wow. So yeah, someone wanted to just come in here, they could pull your code and maybe they didn't like grayscale. And since that's hard coded in, they can change it to whatever they would want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to, I can make this sepia.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what that looks like. Now we're just playing around, right?
But I love it though, because it shows the functionality, which is really, really slick.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty slick. It's pretty slick.
Yeah.
But as we can see, all I did was change grayscale to sepia. That's all you need to do to change that transformation and get a completely different effect.
One thing I want to ask you, this is different than what we covered with the color pop and the different creations that are there, but you did mention the UI coming from ShadCN and the library that's associated. And we've had other DevJams recently be using the same library for iconography and for UI that's coming from there. Tell me about your reasoning for this component library, because it seems to be pretty awesome, but what was your choicing for this?
Yeah, so the reason why I wanted to kind of pull it in is because I had a lot of different UI interactions, such as that modal that we just saw, a lot of the drop downs. There was a lot of things going on like that I wanted to be able to just kind of rapidly add to the application without having to completely build my own custom one from scratch. I had a little bit of a narrow time window, and regardless whether I wanted to or not, this was a really compelling way to be able to get a solid component library to build those, where not only does it allow me to drop in these components, it drops them in as basically copied and paste components, allowing me to customize it to however I'd like, which I did with the dropdown a little bit. But it just makes it a compelling way to be able to get really solid components that work really well, and are pretty easy to use into your application really quickly. So you can spend time again on the parts that make your application unique, not necessarily creating your own custom component library from scratch every time you build an application.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that's why one thing, like if I was creating a new project, similar to what you've done here, but like if I was creating a student project, or if I was creating like let's show a proof of concept type of project, this is fantastic. I would say it's business ready as well, but it's also to say like, there's just a lot to enjoy about this component library. So it's great that you've used it, but I think this is now the third or fourth DevJams that we've seen where someone's using this component library with it. And and not to say this is a part of the Cloudinary part of it all, but it does seem where it's easy to add it and it's easy to make it work within your projects.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really blown up in popularity, and deservingly so because of how much value it's able to provide.
For sure.
So I guess the editor is the other interesting part, and as much as it is the other interesting part, it's the same kind of deal, because since we're using Cloudinary, a lot of what you're going to see is just simply adding these different transformations, right? So ultimately, we make the request to the resource and we pass it along to the client component again, so that we can create that dynamic experience. I use TanStack Query in order to manage a lot of the different requests, such as saving the image once it's transformed, if you want to overwrite it or if you want to create a copy of it. But aside from that, a lot of the filters are managed in state so that we can set a filter and have it temporarily showing until we do save it. There's some actually interesting work going on in how we're actually showing the image in the UI. So one of the challenges that I wanted to solve with this is, imagine you have a square image, you have landscape images, you have portrait images. What I also want for this image, for this canvas to have, is that it's going to take up the full amount of space that it can within the bounds of the browser window, and that's not as easy as it sounds, because as you start to shrink the browser, it's not going to shrink. It's not going to just work. There's not a way to be able to provide this experience without doing some extra magic behind it. So what I ultimately ended up doing to achieve that is I first determine if it's a square, a landscape, or a portrait. And based off of that, I set different CSS properties. So using a width of 100% if it's landscape, because I always want to take up the full width, but I still want it to retain the actual height. So that's going to allow it to responsively change when it's wide. But if it's a tall image, I want it to only take up the max height of the actual of the viewport, so I can define that height of the viewport. And with the width of auto, it'll then scale nicely for me without the conflicting width property on there. That took a little bit of time to actually figure out and make work. I wanted to try to do it as much as I could without JavaScript. And really the only JavaScript that I'm using here is based off of the resource properties. So I like to think that it's a CSS only approach that I was able to make it to. But
yeah, I would say so. I would say, if anything, it would also be a CSS trick. It's definitely something where I would feel like some people that would be tied to the CSS community would be appreciative of this.
Totally. Cool. Yeah. But then kind of moving on to the transformations, I'll kind of skip through a lot of this. A lot of this is just the saving of the copy, the favorites, which is API requests, mostly reaching out to the Cloudinary admin API in order to do things like adding the tag. Ultimately, when we get down to this sheet that includes all the different editing options that you can do, I have a couple different panels. I have the enhance, the crop and resize, and the filters. And at that point, I'm just creating little thumbnails. Well, for the first two tabs, I'm creating buttons for those, but then the second or the third tab, I'm actually showing little thumbnails of each of those. And all I'm doing for that is I'm able to apply the same exact effect as I am on the image itself, and then I can resize the image so that I'm not trying to load a huge image as that tiny thumbnail. I'm able to do so responsively so that it's not going to make a ton of different network requests for more bandwidth than it actually needs to consume. But ultimately, when somebody clicks on one of these different filters, I set it in state to specify which filter that should be applied to the image. Then ultimately, when we get down to the image itself, which I apply the transformations, which are kind of dynamically constructed from state.
What is that ghost variant that I kept seeing?
Ghost variant. So this is part of the ShadCN UI API, where what that's going to do is it's just going to be a different style of the button. So if we look at the button, you can see here that it has a bunch of different variants baked into it, where Ghost is one of it, where it's going to be, I think it's basically like a no background. It's
hover.
So if you hover, no background, but if you hover over it, it highlights. But then you just have a couple different other variants. I think destructive makes it red, if I'm not mistaken. Then you have an outline, secondary. But yeah, it's just another variant of the ShadCN defaults.
Okay. Awesome.
Anything specific you think might be interesting to dive into from this perspective?
I think the thing that's helpful about this is that you're handling the images to be responsive. And then, but it's also where the thing that I also like about this is that it's following a lot of like the standard grid style logic that you also have here when you get outside of like the media viewer itself. It's like the fact that it collapses to 3, it collapses to 2, and you have it where it very nicely handles the grid that you have there. But there's lots of responsive thought that's been applied to this overall project in general.
Yeah. And the nice thing is the way that the image component works, it makes that really nice and easy to do the responsive images. The CLD image component, which comes from Cloudinary, actually wraps the Next.js image component. So it has that responsive sizing built in, only it uses the Cloudinary technology to dynamically resize it on the fly, which is nice. So to just get like some basic resizing, you simply pass this sizes property. But as you go along and want to actually specify some more dynamic, such as if you have a grid and you want it to be the specific sizes that your image is going to be, you can then pass in the sizes that are relative to each of those breakpoints, so that you can really narrow down and make sure that you're not over delivering image sizes based off of the browser or device that's accessing it.
Yes, which is very possible. I have seen where you have basically more breakpoints than you need. And I think that makes tons of sense for the way that this can be done. I think this answers a lot of the questions I had about the project, but also it definitely has gotten me going and thinking about a lot of ways that I should be thinking about Cloudinary. And I worked for a company. So this is fantastic. And as you've shown, it's very easy to spin this up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think knowing that people can just go right to photobox.dev, they can be able to see all of the details about how to locally run the program, to deploy to Vercel, which I love the fact that you have that as a simple, easy option for deployment as well.
Yep.
What was the choice behind that actually? Like, so deploy to Vercel. Obviously, I get it. I would, but why would you want to deploy to Vercel?
Yeah, so Vercel's a great platform. They make it really easy to deploy applications, and in particular, Vercel is the company that primarily backs and develops Next.js. So, given that it's a Next.js application, Vercel is an easy choice to just make it a smooth experience to deploy somewhere that people can really start to take advantage of it. But really, deploying a new instance of it, if you don't really care about the code or want to spin it up locally, all you need to do is really click this, and I can show what that looks like. It's going to, if you have a Vercel account, of course, it's going to open up this page where all you need to do is fill out your environment variables from your Cloudinary account, and it'll instantly deploy it to your Vercel account. So if you just simply want to spin up a new instance of it and don't care about diving into the code, you can do this and immediately have a new Photobox instance.
I think that's the reason to get a Vercel account. So hopefully that works out. But that's pretty slick. I actually haven't seen that connection. Though.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really
yeah. Cool. And I guess the only other thing I want to mention, this is completely all open source. Yes. Make sure you head over there and start it for me. But otherwise, all this code is completely, you can take a look at it. I happily accept pull request if you have another filter you want to add or something like that. But it's here to help you learn as much as you can about how to build this kind of application.
Yeah, I would say like that idea where I kind of threw it in the middle, or like, what if you turn it into a video box? You could literally do that as a pull request situation.
Fork it. I want to see it.
Yeah, there's options to make this what you need it to be very, very quickly. And I will also just kind of stay onto your plug about the overall repository that you're showing here, is that this is part, as we showed earlier, tied to the Cloudinary community space. So there's multiple repositories that are super helpful that are inside of here. Like we've had the Svelte SDK that's part of this. That's inside of here. The overall just Next library that you have in here, that's all in here. So this is definitely where this is a very helpful space. We have lots of repositories that I think not only Photoshop Box, but many parts that can be beneficial for you as a developer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So Jen, final thoughts here. Any questions that we missed? What are you thinking?
Not questions, but just kind of a thought I've had throughout the episode is that a lot of the features we're talking about, be it a collage, be it a zoom pan or that Ken Burns effect, it kind of gets me thinking about some of our e-commerce customers. The product gallery widget doesn't have, to my knowledge, unless it's been iterated on in a way that I don't know about, doesn't have any of these features that we're talking about on this episode. And we were kind of talking about it in a fun way, like making a collage of your family. And when people think of photo albums, it's typically their own personal photos. But at Cloudinary, we also deal with a lot of customer photos. And I was just thinking about how, it would be really valuable to be able to see multiple products. Let's just say it's a sneaker and you're looking at the back of the sneaker, the side of the sneaker, the top of the sneaker, all in one collage. I mean, it just kind of gets some juices flowing for ways that some of our e-commerce customers could incorporate some of this Cloudinary functionality into what they have in their product galleries as well. Kind of a tangent, but just something that's been on my mind as I've been watching some of what Colby built. But yeah, this was a great episode. Colby, thank you so much for your time. This is
no worries.
It's been so much fun. And I know Sam and I are really impressed. If you couldn't see by our faces, the whole episode, just like huge eyes and just like, wow, hearts in our eyes, hearts in my eyes for sure. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to be on.
Yeah.
So Jen, we kind of talked about your big takeaway, but like what's sticking to you? Like, what are your thoughts here? What's the thing that you think that hopefully all the people that are watching this episode are taking away from it?
Well, I hope they just take away what's all possible with Cloudinary if you get creative. So Colby's shown a few ways that he's gotten creative, and he's always been creative with Cloudinary. We looked at CloudyCam, but now this, and with the layers, like there's so much you can do in terms of photo editing and making assets look really epic. So I hope people take away that a lot's possible if you just play with certain features, layers and gravity and transforming only some and removing the background. There's so much you can do with just those things that we've talked about, but there's also so much more that people can do with transformations at Cloudinary. Yeah, I know I'm inspired by this episode, and I think other people will be as well. How about you?
So E zoom pan to G auto, like
Yeah.
blew me away. But it's
Totally.
also, but it, like, not being flippant in this case. I think it is to say there's a lot of transformations that Cloudinary has, thousands, if not thousands. And it's to say what Colby's done is emphasize some of those, but also make it accessible to understand, because through this Photobox application, it's easy to look under the hood and fork the hood and turn it into what you need it to do, and really start to understand how some of these transformations can be applied, as he's pointing out, at scale, where this is something that it can work for every single image in your entire library and be able to show it in different ways and be able to really add that nice movement that you'll be able to see, or be able to emphasize the product the way that he's done with the color pop. There's just the transformations that he's been able to showcase with this. This is gold. And I hope that developers are seeing this show how easy it is to make their project shine with some of the ones that he's emphasized in the Photobox project.
Yeah, and we know that movement is engaging. So that zoom pan that we're talking about, that's engaging, and that's just an image. So, and you don't have to worry about video if that's not something your company's doing, or that's not something you're doing in your personal life. However, you're using your assets. The engagement of that zoom pan, and then Giotto at scale. There's so much good, juicy stuff in this episode. So
Yes. And with that said, juicy stuff in this episode. Well, Jen, the great thing is that if you like juicy stuff, we've got plenty of that inside of our Cloudinary Academy. So if you're interested, you can easily go to training.cloudinary.com to check out all of the amazing coursework, workshops that people have developed for educating developers like you. And on top of that, every DevJams podcast happens to be there. On top of all the places you probably enjoy podcasts, that includes our places like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and many other places that are highly popular. But it is also worth saying here that Colby is actively involved with our Cloudinary community. He's normally in there asking questions, answering questions, and being able to showcase a lot of the work that he's doing. And on top of that, there are more than 2 million registered users of Cloudinary that are doing the same. So make sure to actively involve yourself if you are a Cloudinary user, or if you're just interested in images and videos, at community.cloudinary.com. And then, as a final plug, make sure to check out everything tied to the Photobox project at photobox.dev. So, Jen, final thoughts? Last things to say before we let our audience have their day?
I don't think so. I think I'm just going to go have to spin up Photobox on my own and see what kind of fun I can get up to.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of everybody at Cloudinary, thank you for participating in this DevJams episode. And we hope to see you at the next one, where we talk with more developers who are doing interesting, inspiring, innovative things with images and videos inside of their projects. Take care and see you soon.